Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. This should be a very interesting program today. To get you started today, our superintendent, Mr. Andrew Butt.
It's great to see everyone this morning. I'm going to share a few thoughts, and I am in the fortunate position of not introducing our guests. We have a group of students who are going to do the introductions. So this is really an incredible opportunity to learn from our congressional leaders about civility, about bipartisanship, about working together, how you work together well when you have different ideas and different views and different perspectives. And it's something that's really lost, or we are close to having lost it in our country. And I want to share just a quick story with you. Sort of the timing worked out. I went to Philadelphia this weekend to visit my 97-year-old grandmother. And at 97, I will pass along the applause to her. At 97, she is reminiscing a lot. She's reminiscing a lot about her life during World War II, during the 50s, during the 60s, during the 80s. She kind of skips over the 70s. I'm not sure why. But she talked a lot this weekend about how people got along. She talked about how, where she grew up in Philadelphia, where she worked when she worked for General Electric, after the war, how people got along, came together and solved big problems. And she kept saying, it's a shame that doesn't happen anymore. And I thought, well, Grandma, we are working, there are people working to change that. And all of you here today have the opportunity to hear from 4 people who are doing just that, working incredibly hard to change that and bring cooperation and bipartisanship back to our country, because it's so important for our long-term success. So it is an honor to welcome the 4 of you here. And again, I am in the enviable position of not doing introductions. I'm going to turn that over to our students. So thank you and welcome.
Hi, my name is Maya Sekar. I'm a junior here at Brookline High School, and today I'd like to introduce to you Miss Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware. Miss Blunt Rochester was elected in 2016, is the first woman of color to represent Delaware in the House. She studied in Europe, worked in China at all levels of government, and she prioritizes employment, agriculture, education, and the representation of people of color. Thank you. Oh my God. Did I get up? I don't know. Oh, I think you're only doing something. Okay.
Hi, my name is Susie Stitt. This morning I had the pleasure of speaking with Congressman Rodney Davis. I asked him a lot about what he liked to do when he was younger, going into before becoming a representative, and he spoke of how he didn't initially want to go to college and how his parents actually forced him to go to college, which then he got interested in becoming part of our government. And he spoke a lot of how, how our freedom is really important and how he wanted to go into the government to get things done and to really work hard for people with student loans and debt. And furthermore, now he is working with a lot about agriculture for his district.
Hi, my name is Nairi Harumi, and today I'll be introducing Congressman Joe Kennedy. So we got to talk to them for a little bit this morning, and he was really advocating for issues such as climate change, mental health, and he really believes that we as the youth are really prevalent in that issue and how we can help. So he's very glad to be here today because he thinks that we can make a big impact, and he thinks that it's kind of shifting more from adults teaching kids to kids taking a huge part in teaching adults as well. As you guys know, he also grew up around this area, so he's really glad to be back in his hometown.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon. I'm an exchange student from Xi'an. My Chinese name is Qiu Haitian. Today, I had the pleasure to talk with Mr. Mullen from the state of Oklahoma. He was raised on a farm, and he enjoyed being a farmer, working with his hands. when he was in his 20s, he took over his family business as a plumbing company, and which is now the biggest service company in Oklahoma. And also, fun facts, he won the wrestling scholarship when he was in high school. And he was a mixed martial art professional, and his records was 5 straight wins. But the part I feel most touched is his mindset, that he wanted to continue to push his boundaries and do things and change things, and that's why he chose to be a congressman. So, welcome, Mr. Mullen.
Joe, you want to go? What do we got? Go ahead. All right. Hometown.
Hello? There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. Thrilled to be here with a number of, with all of you and with some very good friends. A little bit of background. And so I actually came into Congress, finishing up my 3rd term, came in with Congressman Mullen, who's become a very good friend of mine over the course of the past 6 years, and with Mr. Davis. So we all came into Congress together. We've all served. We're all just completing our 3rd terms, and we're all reelected into our 4th. And are thrilled to be here again with Lisa Blunt-Rochester from Delaware, who is, we congratulated last night for finishing her freshman year. So freshman term, absolutely.
She's real now.
Yeah, exactly. No more freshmen. And I think we all are, more than anything, looking into turning this over into a conversation with all of you, getting a chance to, for us and for my colleagues here to understand a little bit about what's on your minds, what it is like to live in a community in Brookline, in Greater Boston, in the Northeast. Some of the issues that you guys are thinking about, the issues that you're learning about, the issues that when you look at your federal government, things that we are addressing, things that we're not, things we could be doing better, things, if anything, that we are doing well. Mark Wayne and I, Mark Wayne, Mr. Mullen, excuse me, is a mixed martial arts professional. He puts some of us through a little bit of an exercise routine in the gym every morning. I don't do it quite as well as he does, as some of you might be able to tell. But it is from somebody that lives in parts of rural Oklahoma, the realities of the issues that he confronts in his district, or Mr. Davis confronts in his, around agriculture. There's not a whole lot of family farms in Brookline anymore. And so the issues that you guys and your parents bring up to my attention as I'm running around trying to do my best to represent all of you can be very, very different than the ones that they hear from their constituents back home, and Lisa as well. And so part of this is, yes, an educational opportunity, I hope, for all of you, but my hope in this is actually that it's a extraordinary educational opportunity for all of us to be able to get a chance to see just how big and broad and different and diverse these issues are around the country. And I think we've been able to already, over the course of the past 24 hours or so, open up that conversation. So looking forward to the discussion here. Ask as many hard and difficult questions as you would like. My colleagues will be very happy to answer all of them. And I will punt to them happily. You guys want to?
You want to do, how much time we got? You want to get to their questions?
Yeah, just, sure. Do you want to, there's a microphone right there. Huh?
So we're going to have students lining up over here to ask questions, and then we'll have people coming up, and the congressman will then answer questions. So come right over here to the mic. We'll put that on.
Yeah. So we got till 9:50.
Renata? Say your name, I'll repeat your question. No, but I can repeat it.
All right, so I was wondering if you are...
First problem solved by Mark Wayne Mullen. There you go. Mark Wayne just said he actually didn't do anything, but he's claiming credit like any good politician. Go ahead.
At times, you have to represent districts and parties that have conflicting beliefs, and oftentimes there's a lot of conflicting opinions within the party and within the parties and people that you're supposed to represent. How do you best represent them, even given the divisive conflict?
First of all, I got to introduce my beautiful wife. She's with me. Christy, stand up, please. Ladies, she was also a professional kickboxer too. So for you guys, stay away. She'll hurt you. I take a look at things differently. First thing that we have to do anytime that we're having a discussion, we've got to put ourselves in that person's shoes, or otherwise we take things real personal. So we're all raised different. We all come from different backgrounds, and we make decisions based on two things: the way we're raised and our life experiences. And so when I'm discussing conversations with Joe, his life experiences and the way he was raised was quite a bit different than mine. So in order for me to even pretend like I know where he's coming from, I've got to step back and take my look from where he's looking from. And that can go with any conversation you have. Because at the end of the day, I'm elected to represent the great state of Oklahoma, and he represents Boston. And that's exactly the way our founding fathers set it up. But in politics, a lot of times we allow anger to get in before we even take a look from their point of view. And if we can take a deep breath and step back and say, before we can open the dialogue, let's make one thing clear. I love this country, you love this country, I'm representing my backyard, you're representing your backyard. Now where can we work together to start negotiating what's best for this country? And so often we allow politics to interrupt that.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am so pleased to be here. First, I want to thank Maya also for that introduction. Thank you, Maya. Give her a round of applause, please. Show some love for Maya. It's a great question, and for me, as one of the 7 members in Congress that represents a whole state, I'm at large. So I represent the entire state of Delaware, and Delaware is a very diverse place. A lot of people don't realize that in addition to being like the incorporation capital of the world where many companies are incorporated, we also have family farms all up and down our state. So farming is huge for us. We also have beaches and a lot of tourism and a lot of environmental interests as well. And so I come from a state, and if you look at our state, we're only 3 counties, and the top county is very blue and very populated, and then the middle one is maybe purplish, and the bottom one is red. So I truly have to represent all different interests, and it makes it hard sometimes because you want to hear all the different perspectives. So for example, we did a teletown hall meeting where people could call in on the tax bill. We had 11,000 people call into that teletown hall. I wouldn't have been able to do that same thing if it was just in a room like this. 11,000 people wouldn't be able to fit in. So I have to find different and creative ways to get feedback from people, whether it's social media, whether it's teletown halls, real town hall meetings, and then it's just doing round tables, discussions. I'm on the agriculture committee. So when it was time to do the farm bill, I reached out to farmers. I went on their farms and talked to them. I actually had roundtables with people who dealt with the SNAP program and other things. So it's really about hearing from the people and then translating that back and hearing from my colleagues as well and getting the best information. What I tell people is that I'm not going to promise I'll vote this way or that way. What I promise is that I'll be open, that I'll listen, and that I'll try to make the best decisions on behalf of Delaware and our country.
I'll try and finish this one up real quick, but you asked about divisiveness. And when you turn the TV on or you go to social media, all you see in Congress and government is divisiveness. All you ever see is us fighting, right? Well, I hope in the first 5 minutes that we've been here, you realize we actually like each other. And the majority of what we do in Washington, I like them really a lot. Joe and Lisa. And Mark Wayne somewhat. But we do like each other, and we joke around with each other. But the majority of what we do in Washington you'd be surprised, it's actually bipartisan. It's the areas that we disagree that get the most attention in the media that you see. So I hope the message you take away from here is that we can solve problems. We can get things done. Look, I've offered plenty of times to my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle to settle all of our major issues with a cage fight because we got Mark Wayne on our side. I figured we'd always win. But they didn't accept that. So what we have to do is sit down, debate, discuss. We may have disagreements. We may have knockdown, drag-out arguments like Lisa and I did over the Farm Bill discussions. But in the end, we just came together, worked out our differences last week, and you know what? We passed it. That's huge for my district. It's huge for her district. Also Mark Wayne. So one last thing I want to remind you of. Although Mark Wayne and I are both Republicans, our districts are much different. His district is a lot different than the constituents I represent. So when you see somebody on TV that has been elected, remember, they represent the constituents that sent them there to Washington. And you have to have some respect for their viewpoint too, just like we do for you, because you send somebody like Joe. And we thank you for that, because he's actually a good guy.
So I just have a pretty broad question. So I have a history essay, and the question is, what's the role of government? So I was just wondering if you could just answer that for me so I can just straight up write that down.
That was good.
You want me to write it down on pen and paper for you? What is the role of government? Without getting into the whole history lesson too, look, the bottom line that I would say, the role of government is to solve problems that affect us all. My predecessor in office, Barney Frank, who some of you might know or have heard of, or your parents might remember, had the best definition of government that I had ever heard. It is men and women sitting around a table trying to solve a problem. And that's what we do. It's about a problem that affects us all. So whether that be issues around taxes or healthcare or climate change or gun violence, issues that are not just focused on one industry or interest or person, but issues that affect our society writ large and the solutions that are going to impact society writ large too. Because a solution for somebody is going to create potentially a problem for somebody else. Very few of these challenges, even the ones I just articulated, the solutions that I would think of are probably going to impact people differently in my district versus Mark Wayne's district, versus Rodney's district versus Lisa's district. The district that I represent, writ large, it starts here, you guys. It goes down to Fall River, Massachusetts. When people talk about transportation issues, when you talk about climate change, people will talk about a gas tax. A gas tax is not going to affect people in my district all that badly. People that have to commute 50, 60, 70 miles to work every day, like they do in their districts, it's a very big deal. You're not popping on public transportation where you can actually afford to be able to get in to work and get back. That's a much bigger issue on the way that it affects your way of life. And so I think government's role is to try to, for these big issues that affect us as a community, as a country, as a nation, to try to find ways that we can address them while minimizing the impacts to other people, and to try to build a consensus that says, hey, if it is going to impact you, let's try to make sure we can come up with something else to make sure that effect is minimized. You take everybody's voice into account, you try to get people around a table that are willing to sit down and address that concern, and then actually come up with a solution.
I would only add one other thing, is that ultimately we're trying to solve these problems so that people have a better quality of life. And specifically, like the transportation example that was given, you know, it's our job to create the opportunities for a business to thrive. It's our job to ensure that people aren't discriminated against based on their race or their religion or their, so I think part of government's role is everything that the congressman said, and ultimately to improve the lives of people in our country. And the world, actually, because we are connected. We are connected to the world. And so we do a lot that's international as well.
Hi. I was just kind of going through the recent IPCC report by the UN, and you know, we have a 12-year deadline to pretty much solve climate change. Otherwise, it's irreversible. Gosh, words. And I'm just wondering, you were talking about how the government's role is to provide solutions, how you actually get things done. And just wondering, what is your solution? I've heard about the Green New Deal. Just wondering if you guys are backing that up. I know Messer County is, I think, but just what is
No, I'm not supporting the new Green Deal. My district is home to some of our best paying jobs, represented by some of the best paying jobs in my district are at our 4 coal-fired power plants that provide baseload generating capacity for many of the residents of Chicago, Illinois, even though I live 3.5 hours away. I have a nuclear facility in my district too. We cannot power the American economy on wind and solar and renewable energy alone. Until we find the transformers all spark, we're going to have coal and we're going to have nuclear power. And how many people drive an electric vehicle? Or your parents do? All right. Where does that power come from when you plug it in? Does it come from a windmill? Does it come from solar? No. Probably around here, it may come from a coal or a nuclear facility. So for us to be able to move toward a more renewable society and an cleaner energy society, we also have to understand that we need large-scale power generation that those types of facilities, along with natural gas, give us. Now, when you look at what we've done in America over the last 25, 30 years, this is what I don't think our country gets enough credit for. We've reduced the emissions, the output of our energy generation, of our energy generators, by upwards of 90 to 95% already. And we're competing against countries who come nowhere near our emission standards. So you have to have balance. My constituents demand that balance, whereas Joe's constituents may not. And many of you may disagree with what my constituents want in central Illinois, but that's what's great about our government. We can come together, we can find those solutions. But to answer your question about the new Green Deal that many of our new colleagues are pushing, absolutely not. My constituents do not want me to support that.
So I do support it, but I think it's also important when I gave you the example around the people sitting around a table trying to solve the problem, to recognize that one, for the constituents that I represent and the communities I represent, like you, like here, there's an awful lot of energy to try to exert it, to try to say, hey, climate change has been a big issue that Congress has been ignoring for a while. We now have an opportunity in the House of Representatives to at least start putting forth an agenda to try to meet these goals. We need to do that. And we do. And what I think a second aspect of the Green New Deal, which you might be familiar with, is called part of that just transition. And one of the impacts of that is to say, look, if we're going to make these investments, if we're going to make this transition, it is going to be highly disruptive to industries, areas of the country, jobs, people, professions, hopes, dreams, families, all the rest of it. And to not kind of take that for granted or not just brush that aside, because if we are successful at this, there's going to be a number of families in one district alone, not to mention all of the other ones that are represented by, that have similar makeups like Mr. Davis's, that are going to have a similar story to tell. And we have to make sure we're taking care of those workers. We have to make sure that in this transition, we are able to provide cities like Chicago with the energy that they need. And that's not going to happen overnight. But that doesn't mean that just because the problem is so big, that we're going to sit there and say it's too hard to solve. And I think there is a way to tap into both to say we need to address this because of the potential consequences and impacts if we don't, which I think are very well documented. That is going to come up with one, initial costs, and then two, transition costs, because if you do this, there's going to be people across the country that are dislocated, that lose their jobs. But we have to be able to, that has to be part of the problem that we try to solve as well.
Go ahead.
Okay. I never ran for anything in my life until 2015. I had never run for PTA, dog catcher, mayor, nothing. And it was during a time when I felt the elections and the politics and the discourse was so negative that I had just actually lost my husband. He had gone on a business trip, ruptured his Achilles tendon, blood clots went to his heart and lungs, and he died at the age of 52. And on the anniversary of his passing, I had to find my purpose again. And I remember thinking, I started off as an intern in a congressional office in 1987 and thought maybe someday I could be back here. And I said, if I ran, why would I run? And there were 3 P's. One was purpose, that people should be able to live their purpose on this planet. And that was jobs, and that was education, it was all those things. The other was peace. I was an international relations major, and I had traveled to different countries, and peace was important to me. But the third was the planet. Without a planet, none of this makes a difference. We won't be here. We won't be talking about immigration. We won't be talking about health care. So a sense of urgency, everybody in this room, especially you guys, because I don't have as much time to live as you do. This is the issue of our time. If nothing else, if you leave here with nothing else, this is why you engage. This is what civics is about. This is what democracy is about. It is about tackling the issues that deal with our presence on this planet. And so what sometimes happens in politics is that we get a name or a term and we shut down. We go into our corners. We say, I don't support this, whatever you want to call it, jobs for all or whatever. But we have to come together. Doing things like this helps us see each other as humans, so when it's time to sit down and really make the tough decisions about the transition, we can say, what's our common ground? Our common ground is to save our planet. Our common ground is to think about new jobs. I'm really big into the future of work, because that's aspirational and it's an opportunity as opposed to what I'm going to lose. This is an example that helps get us to climate change. You and your presence here, if you walk out of this room with nothing else, understand your connection to making a change and saving our planet. This is the issue. This is an issue of our time.
This is one of those issues that does show the differences. For instance, I don't live in a big city. We don't deal with smog. The biggest traffic jam I have living in my house is all the horses that get on my driveway. But I'm also been living in this same piece of property for generations now. I'm the 4th generation. My kids are the 5th generation. And no one takes care of their backyard better than we do, because we take a tremendous amount of pride in it. I'm also a business owner, an entrepreneur, and I also understand cost. And when you start thinking about the balance that has to be made, if you just strictly go to renewable energy, as Rodney was saying, and you do away with some of the fossil fuels, what kind of cost is that going to be adding to your daily life, to the companies that's going to be trying to go in business? Because electricity, energy cost, is a huge factor when you're figuring out business practices and the cost of your products. We haven't figured out how to store electricity yet. So the only way to actually store electricity is through fossil fuels, because you can't store solar, you can't store wind. You either use it or you lose it. But with coal, it's there, and when you need it, it's on demand and you can create it. With natural gas, it's there on demand and you can use it when you need it. The balance between the two is truly all the above, but we have to step back and look at the balance of government. As what we said before, what is the role of government? It's to look at the picture as a whole, not dig in on sides, but look as a picture as a whole, and how can we find a solution that fits us all, that works for Boston, that works for Westville, where I'm from, and not just one side. As my colleague was saying, a lot of times we dig in. My constituents are dug in on climate change because it's no longer a bipartisan word, it's a partisan word. And we need to back off of that and look at it once again as a whole. And we can do that. And as we said, this is how we do it right here. But that was a great question. Thank you. What was your name, by the way?
Saya.
Saya? Thank you. By the way, I don't know anybody else that reads that UN report that's in high school but you.
There you go, Mark.
So, you guys seem to be able to like work together really well, and like you know get along. But I was wondering, and climate change might be one, but are there any other issues that kind of like get between you guys, like you can't really agree on, even though you're very committed to this bipartisan partnership? And how are you able to kind of like work out those kind of differences?
Healthcare gets me between us. But I'm going to, after taxes, immigration, all the whole list of things. But really, Joe and I, we developed a friendship early on because he got in an elevator and he had shoulder surgery. And where I come from, pain is just kind of part of fun. And so he had a shoulder that was all bummed up, and I'm sitting on the elevator, and I slap him on the shoulder. He drops to one knee, calls me a whole bunch of inappropriate names, and I laugh, and I thought we're going to be good friends. And it was hilarious. But you go back and you go to 2013. We're in a shutdown. And one of the big fights is about health care during that shutdown. And Joe was in my office, and we're sitting here talking about it. And this is where I came up with the idea that I've got to start looking at the perspective from someone else's point of view, because we all make decisions, as I said, based on two things: our life experience and the way we're raised. And so I'm visiting with Joe, and I was like, Joe, where's the common ground on this? I mean, I don't even see where you're coming from. How is this good that we're mandating businesses like myself to have to provide insurance, even though I've already provided insurance for my first employee? And then where does that boundary come up that says when you got 49 employees, you don't have to do it, but when you have 50, you can all of a sudden, you get that magical number where you can afford it? That doesn't exist. And Joe was sitting in my office, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, Mark Wayne, my family has been working for 50 years for some type of universal health care. It is something my family is extremely passionate about. And I sat there, and just by looking at him in the eyes and seeing his body language, I could tell he was extremely serious about it. And then I sat there and I was like, my family, I'm Native American, I'm Cherokee. We've been wanting the government to leave us alone for like 200 years. Don't get involved with us. Quit moving us from place to place and telling us how we got to live. So we come from totally different perspectives. But that's a tremendous amount of respect that you have. And even that conversation can be had, because actually, when you think about being Cherokee, we have a thing called Indian Health Services, and it's ran by the government. So there is a balance that we can come to if we just are willing to sit back and dig out of our own little trench and look over it a little bit and say there's a human on the other side, and we can have a conversation.
So Mark Wayne's right. Look, I think on it's your question, where do we disagree? Like, we agree on a lot of stuff. We disagree on a lot of stuff too. Healthcare, immigration, taxes, and there's a long and distinguished list there. The challenge with them on a number of these issues is you end up kind of boiling down to a different principle. Right? And it's rooted in a fairly simple idea. My basis for it is that on the wealthiest country on earth, every single person here should be able to get access to the healthcare that you need when you need it at a price you can afford, period. End of sentence, full stop. However you do that, great, but you cannot in this country be to a point where you're saying healthcare is going to be contingent, the level of healthcare that you get is going to be contingent on your ability to actually write a check. The flip side to that is just what Mark Wayne said, right? There is an element of trying to create this balance between how intrusive a federal government is and actually making good on those promises, particularly for people with histories or location or geography where there's space, neighbors are miles away, not just above you or below you. And the government doesn't necessarily always have a history of doing things all that well or in the best interest of some of the people that it seeks to serve. And so people are far more skeptical and look at this through a different base principle than I do. And that's where an awful lot of this comes back to. I think there's ways to continue to try to chip away at it, and I'll continue to try to chip away at it. That is also where, respectfully to my two colleagues on each side here, For the past as long as I've been in office and for 2 years before that, we have had one narrative out of the House of Representatives about how terrible healthcare is and the Affordable Care Act is. We now have an opportunity to actually recast some of that discussion around the fact that it actually did do some good things. And I expect you're going to hear that and try to find ways that we can actually strengthen it and expand it. Medicaid expansion, healthcare for low-income families, was something that was terrible when Obama was doing it. When Obama was no longer there, you've had a number of conservative states that have expanded it by ballot initiative. Not called Obamacare, but called something else. People should be able to get access to healthcare. And we actually already have a system in place where more or less people do. They just can't afford it. And that's also bananas.
You know, Joe and Mark Wayne are right. It's a great question. I too agree with Joe and Mark Wayne and Lisa. We all have the same goals. I believe we're the wealthiest nation in the world, that every single family in this country deserves access to affordable health care. And unfortunately, they still don't get it. And many families are still left behind, even under the system. So we have the same goals, but sometimes we just disagree on how to get there. And that's what governing's all about. That's what our job is. Our job is to sit down and have discussions and find out where we can find that common ground, and then change the law, get it signed, and then go tout that bipartisan agreement. And then we'll watch all the pundits criticize us for it. You know, we get criticized more for working together than we do for being apart. Now, one thing that I found, I was in that meeting with Mark Wayne and Joe during the 2013 government shutdown, when Joe made those comments, and it had an impact on me too. Because you get to learn that you represent your constituency, which is much different than Joe's, which are here. But the problem I see in Washington, all of us can sit down and probably solve healthcare issues. We could come up with a good plan together. We could come up with a plan to solve immigration. We could come up with a good bipartisan plan on taxes and tax cuts. But as soon as we start to get toward that solution, it's the leadership of both parties that seem to come in and pry us further away. And we all have to have more courage at our level to be able to forge ahead and find those solutions that you're looking for. Now, before I give the mic up, I want to make sure that you all know that we do not condone bullying on elevators in Congress. Okay? Mark Wayne should never have hit Joe in the shoulder, although I wish I was there to video it because it would have been pretty funny. But we're now going to get Mark Wayne counseling that he needs and deserves after mentioning that to you. So thank you very much for that public service announcement that bullying is not okay, Mark Wayne.
The only thing that I would add to the answer is that you asked specifically about the areas where we don't agree. But I think as a new member of Congress, what was interesting is to see within our own caucus, like within the Democratic caucus and within the Republican caucus, there are times when we don't agree. And that's when it really gets tricky, because you're within your own party. So in addition to the complication of Republicans and Democrats, there will be Democrats and Democrats that don't get along on an issue, and the same is true with Republicans and Republicans.
Hi, I'm Grace Sokolow, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your agriculture policies from an economic perspective as well as an environmental perspective, and how those can be like reconciled to make a sustainable future.
Well, thank you. In my district, as was mentioned in the great introduction, thank you again very, very much. Agriculture is huge to my Central Illinois district. It's my largest employer, not just the family farmers, but also many companies that exist in our communities to make agricultural products. Some of our largest employers are global giants in agribusiness, be it ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, Tate & Lyle, GSI. These are global companies that are headquartered in my district that are all centered around agriculture. So when I got to Washington, when Joe and Mark Wayne and I got elected in 2012, I sought a seat on the Agriculture Committee. Lisa's on that committee now. She serves on the subcommittee that I've had the opportunity to chair over the last 4 years. Ag policy is viewed much differently here in Boston than it is in Springfield, Illinois, which is in the heart of my district. So when Lisa and I got to know each other, she got a seat on the Agriculture Committee. I wanted to know what impacted Delaware, because I look at Delaware and I think of Wilmington. I think of the city. but her district contains a lot of agricultural related issues, plus some of the agribusiness giants like Dow DuPont, where many agricultural products come out of her district. I went to her district to learn more about it. And as a matter of fact, it was great because while I was there, I found out that Dow DuPont was working with ADM on a brand new product that was going to be a much more biodegradable plastic water bottle. That happened because of partnerships that we didn't even know about, because those companies work together. But it brought our districts together. So when we started talking about agriculture policy, and when we passed the Farm Bill, we agreed on most of the ag policies that were in place. We just had some disagreements because 80% of the Farm Bill is our food stamp program. And Lisa and I have much different viewpoints on how that program should be run. But in the end, the policies like a crop insurance-based program, Farm Bill, is very important to my constituents, to have a backstop so they continue to grow the food that not just feeds us here in this country, but feeds the world. We needed flexibility within our risk management programs like ARC and PLC, programs that are very important for our farmers to take the risks they do every year, plant a seed, hope it grows, and then hope they can get it out of the ground and have a marketplace to sell it. They need that backstop, otherwise they can't go get the funding necessary to plant the seed that year and to harvest that crop and to buy the equipment to do so. But you'd be surprised, as a Republican, I've taken the lead on organic issues. Organic foods only continue to increase their demand in areas that don't grow food. So part of my big wins in the Farm Bill was increasing the ability for farmers to transition to be organic producers. And I'm the first ever Republican legislator that's ever been honored as the Organic Trade Association's Legislator of the Year. But these are big wins for my district because you got to look ahead and see what the demands are. That's what good ag policy does, and that's what we just passed in our bill last week.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will tell you, I wanted to get on the Ag Committee because, first of all, it was known historically as one of the most bipartisan committees, and I wanted to be on a committee where something was actually going to get done, like not just a lot of talk, but like something get done, and the Farm Bill comes around every 5 years. As was said, to me, the agriculture is urban, rural, and global. It's food insecurity, it's SNAP and nutrition programs, but it's also biotech, and it's also our farms. And so in Delaware, the Farm Bill itself poses a lot of opportunities, but you also in your question asked about the environmental aspect of it. And so for Delaware, we have challenges because, number one, we have chemicals. We also have farms that things might happen that create environmental unintended consequences. So for example, even the water quality and what happens as a result of poultry farming. One of the things that was important for us to get into the Farm Bill was a focus on conservation. And that's really important. So we got a part of the bill that focuses on our poultry industry and making sure that we can have more environmentally friendly activities up front. The other thing was our land grant institutions, 1890 colleges and universities, like historically black colleges. We were able to get $40 million put in for scholarships for young people as well, which I think is a very big thing. And then last but not least, on the nutrition piece and the SNAP program, otherwise known as food stamps, that was a big issue for us because our committee was working very well until we came to the idea of harsher work requirements for SNAP. And so there was some disagreement. I come from the perspective, I was Secretary of Labor in Delaware, I was Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services, I headed up state personnel, so I know jobs are important and we need to be training people for those jobs. But if we're going to do it, it needs to be properly funded and it needs to be tested. And that was part of my challenge with what was being proposed. And so we were able to come together, and I wish that the media saw how important this is. I mean, this was a major, major bill that we passed on a bipartisan manner in both the House and the Senate. Huge. I mean, there are not many of those that we can talk about. There was a big water infrastructure bill that was started on the Senate side by my Senator, Tom Carper, and this Farm Bill is huge. I must have looked like a freshman because when we passed it, I was actually jumping on the floor of the house. I was doing woohoo. I was telling people high five me because I thought it was big. And I felt really proud. When we came to a standstill, I remember saying to Rodney, I was heartbroken when our committee talks broke down. I wasn't mad, I was heartbroken because I told them the American public, they're looking at us. They want to see us get something done and have confidence in us. So to be able to pass that farm bill last week, shoot, I wanted to take a selfie right there on the floor, but it's against the rules.
So let's do this to make sure we can get through as many of these questions as possible. You guys ask, we will try to make sure at least one of us addresses it, and then maybe a second to offer an alternative perspective. But we got about 20 minutes or so left, and a number of folks. So we can try to be a little bit tighter in our answers too. So go for it.
All right, so I'll try to make this as quick as possible then. So you all seem to be very reasonable people, which is but we can't. But as regular citizens, especially people who are very tapped into the internet and the media, and really this has been happening since the advent of the internet, we only seem to see the extremes and the atrocities of both sides of the political spectrum, whereas the more moderate and bipartisan side, such as your most recent bill that you passed, seems to be overlooked. So I was wondering how you deal with such a disparity in the citizens, when the citizens absolutely despise and hate each other just for mentioning, oh, I'm conservative, oh, I'm liberal.
Well, give me your name.
Calvin.
How many of you guys in here have ever watched a Hallmark movie? Yeah, now how many of you guys have watched, I don't know, or played Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto? Yeah, my point is if it bleeds, it leads. And people aren't interested in good feel stories. This should be something that CNN or Fox or anybody should be covering because this shows what Congress is really about. I get on a plane, about 4 or 5 planes a week. And the number one question when they find out I'm a congressman, and I try to keep that to myself, is the first thing that they ask me is, why can't you just get along? Why can't you all get along? And the first thing I pop back to them is, how many members of Congress can you name? And I've never had anybody name more than 10. The fact is, if you count the senators too, there's 525 others of us. And there's a bunch of us that actually do get along. But unfortunately, what gets the headlines are the ones up there that's willing to throw all their colleagues underneath the bus because they want to say, I know best and the rest of the world should follow me. The fact is, that isn't how our founding fathers set it up. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't have 217 other colleagues to agree with you, your idea means nothing. So what we have to do is go to schools like this and show, guys, there is a better side to us. And it's a great honor to be able to serve in the nation's capital. And we should respect it and treat it with respect. But we shouldn't assume that everything works the way we see it on the internet or on TV.
You know, real quick on this, your generation has grown up in a lot different generation than us. We had 3 channels when we were kids. The news was the news was the news, and it was on at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. That was it. You have to, we don't have broadcasting anymore. We have what I consider narrowcasting. I bet you every one of you that gets your news sources chooses which news source you get it from. And I'll bet you probably agree with most of the stories before they're even printed. So you got to make a special effort in your generation to go search out a different viewpoint. Get both sides and then make a judgment of what you feel is correct and what you feel isn't. Otherwise, we're going to lead to more polarization, which is what we're here to try and fight against. So thank you, great question, and your generation is going to be the key.
I made a list of 9 questions, but I'm going to choose probably the quickest one and the heaviest one. What's the plan for working with the Trump White House, and is there a legitimate threat of a government shutdown?
So I'll start with that. Plan for working with the Trump White House, I would say the person on my right and left have, for the most part, I don't want to speak for them, but enjoyed working with the Trump White House for the past 2 years. I haven't, for what that's worth. Is there a legitimate of a government shutdown? Yes, absolutely, yes. Without question, I think that so yes, why don't we leave it there? We can get into the additional detail if folks want. What's the plan? I will tell you my plan on this, and I can't, again, speak for everybody. What the advice that I would give to my colleagues and our leadership on this is for our House of Representatives that just won an election and now is going to be in the majority for the first time in nearly a decade. We won because we ran on a series of issues that I think the American public writ large wants us to be able to address, and for one reason or another, we're not addressed under the past several years of Republican leadership. The president is going to make himself the center of attention regardless of what we do. Focus on the issues that drove those campaigns and that earned us the support of the American public, and let him do him. If we get into the challenge of chasing every shiny thing that he says or does that we do not agree with, and look, you have to push back on some of that, absolutely, but it's going to end up being about him and not about the fact that there are real challenges that American families are confronting that we then chose to ignore just because we decided that you had to fight back every time somebody tweets in all caps. That is not an effective governing strategy. The last thing I'll say, Mark Wayne, as I indicated, Mr. Mullen, as I indicated, leads a little workout group in the mornings. Last summer, late summer, I asked 3 Republican colleagues in that, had recently done polls in their district, in campaigns, that tested the favorability of the president. Republican districts in the South for Republican primary voters. Anybody shout out to me what you think the lowest level of support that those voters had for the president was? 90, 30, what else? 60, 70, 80? You are all low. Lowest one from the 3 people that told me was 94%. So as much as there is a rejection for an awful lot of what this administration does and the perception that they put around it, which I think is sometimes even the more challenging piece, I also work in a body where a sizable number of my colleagues are proud of the government that they see every single day coming out of the White House. And that is something that I have to wrestle with to say, whether I like it or not, there is something there that resonates with them. And those are American voices too. And it's up to me to actually try to spend a little bit more time trying to figure that out, to try to understand why it is that a fellow American that is, many of folks that I represent that are horrified by what they see coming out of this administration every day, that 1,500 miles away, there are people that are proud of what they see coming out of this administration every day. And it's a side that not everybody here actually gets to see all that often.
I was just going to quickly add 2 areas we should be working together on are healthcare and climate change. 2 areas where there is a potential to really do something, infrastructure, I would say, and the other is criminal justice. And immigration, we hope. We hope. So those are the biggies.
Let me throw real quick something. As fearful as Joe's district is of Trump, my district was fearful of Obama. And so it's just a difference of the way we look at it. Now, real quick about the government shutdown. Most of you guys in here won't even realize the government shutdown. Most of the constituents in Boston won't even know the government shutdown because 70% of the government is already funded, only about 30 of it, which is really the interior side of it. My constituents will feel it more than anyone because BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, is part of the interior. So that's going to be the biggest impact. The average individual out there, other than Washington, D.C., probably won't even know it's shut down, but the media is going to blow it up like the government is shutting down right before Christmas. So we have, instead of Hallmark movies, we're going to have the doomsday aspect of it.
Thank you for coming. I wanted to ask, because pretty much all of us are going to be able to vote in the 2020 election, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying earlier about doing your research on the candidate, addressing the issues. What's some of the best advice you can give us on who to trust in terms of what they stand on, and what should we be looking for most in presidential candidates?
Well, great, not just presidential candidates. Get to know your candidates up and down. I would bet you that every city council person here and every local official would love to have somebody from this high school. It only doesn't work with me. Did you guys figure that out? At least has got the magic touch. Get to know your local officials. If you've got a concern with law enforcement here in your city, get to know your police chief. Put a face with a name. Familiarity breeds where you can come up and realize that you probably agree on more than you disagree. It's the reason why we all get to know each other in Washington, because then it allows you to be able to work together. So get to know your candidates, not just the presidential candidates. Get to know your member of Congress. We want to hear from you. If you're interested in government, raise your hand if you want to do what we do someday. Raise your hand if you want to be in Congress. All right. Good. Don't run against Joe, okay? But if you do, call me, all right? We'll have some fun with that one. No, in all seriousness, when I was your age, I would have never raised my hand because I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. So the key is, if you're interested in government, figure out who represents you now, figure out who they are, go get to know them, and then you can be a better judge of who you want to vote for, because you'll know if you want to keep them or you'll know if you want to get them out if they don't respond to you. And you'll be a better informed voter up and down the ticket. Don't just focus on the top.
Thanks so much.
So it's come to my attention in recent times with the new farming bill that there were concerns brought up concerning China's trade war with soybeans. So I was wondering generally, like, how did you find out about that? How did you take that into consideration when writing the bill? And how do you take international relations into consideration when drawing up bills?
Okay, quick, how I found out about it, seriously, I was at a dinner with the Soybean Association. But you also got to realize that the U.S. feeds about 70% of the world. And our food commodity is a high market too. There isn't anybody that can replace us. So while it may be a soybean trade war, truthfully speaking, there's no one to take our spot either. Because say Brazil, their food is already spoken for to other countries, and so then it goes to the higher market. What is China willing to pay for it? Because they're going to have to pay top dollar versus us. They've already negotiated a deal. So it really wasn't as much as a trade war as it was them backing back off of what they had done versus what we have done too. Unfortunately, there has been a back and forth when it comes to trade, and all we're saying inside the United States is treat us the same way we treat you. If we're going to have trade deals, then it needs to be fair or free, but it needs to be across the board evenly.
No, I could talk more on that because we have a lot of soy in my state and soybeans, and I think the biggest thing for us and what I was advocating for is understanding what is the strategy. What is the end game? I actually lived in China for 4 years, and I know we talk about a 5-year plan, 10-year plan. They have a 100-year plan. We need to be really good partners. We need to be strategic, and we need to have a plan. And that was my only concern, and therefore I introduced a bill to try to help our farmers for trade adjustment assistance.
Hi. So we've heard a lot about your differences and the points on which you disagree, either between political parties and within them. But we're all juniors. In 2 years, we're all going to be out wherever we are, like doing whatever we're doing. And we've all grown up in this very liberal bubble. So I guess what advice would you have in wherever we end up in having these conversations, considering our state of partisanship as a country right now?
The single best thing that I would ask of all of you, regardless of where you go, right, is, if I could ask for one thing writ large across the country, it's just a little bit more empathy across the board, right? It is, and that is across the board. So that is going to be wherever you all end up. When you're down the hall from a conservative colleague, if you end up in a conservative state, if you end up taking a job in a conservative industry, to spend some time genuinely listening to why it is that when somebody asks, do you support a Green New Deal, which for most of my constituents, particularly around here, is a no-brainer, why when somebody says no, you get a chance to get to the answer that you heard from Mr. Davis. Right? But it is also then fair to also want that same person to spend a little bit more time to listen to you as well about the reasons why in the schools that I go to, in the communities that I represent, when you ask writ large what the number one issues are across communities like yours, healthcare, almost always at the top. Gun violence, almost always at the top. Climate change, almost always at the top. I imagine if you ask those same top priorities for high schools in Mark Wayne's district, those aren't going to be the same three issues that come up. Or if it is gun violence, it is going to be framed in a very different way than we will frame it here. And so that exchange back and forth, that is not to say, well, I believe yes very strongly as to what I think the right answer is on some of that. There's a different way of looking at some of those issues that is where we have to get to, because you end up otherwise actually rooting the conversation in a different base principle, and we just talk by each other, because you're actually not addressing the underlying source of disagreement.
Could I add a book that has been helpful to me called The Four Agreements? And if you've never read it, it's a little but the four agreements themselves are really good. The first is be impeccable with your word. You know, how you talk to others and how you talk to yourself, back to the empathy. The second is about don't take things personally. That's really important in this business, because if you're taking things personally, you get stuck. The other one is don't make assumptions. A lot of times we make assumptions about people based on what they look like, where they come from, or because they take a position on something. And the last one is just do your best. Always do your best. It'll change. If you're sick, your best is different than when you're well, but just do your best. Four agreements.
Hi, my name is Zeberdos. I come from a country where the flames of democracy are diminishing, maybe even dying out, and despotism is finding a hold. Hungary. Recently, an American university, registered in New York, the Central European University, was forced to leave the country and go to Vienna. So my question is, what is the role of the government in supporting American individuals and organizations abroad? And what can Congress do, and what can we students do in spreading the rights that we hold fundamental in the US toward other nations where they are not trusted, they're not enforced, and they're not written down in the Constitution?
Well, I think there's two different roles. First of all, I spent a lot of time around the world, spent a lot of time in the Middle East. First thing, and as you know, coming from Hungary, our way of thinking that the rest of the world operates is drastically different. So the idea that we're just going to take our form of government and pluck it and put it on a country that's been there a lot longer than we have, and think that they're going to respect it and they're going to understand it, and it's going to operate like ours operates, it's just not realistic. But if at the same time, while we're sitting here on the national stage and we're bickering and fighting among ourselves, and the rest of the world now is getting to see it, they also have a disdain about the way our government works too. So we have to, one, show the good side, the way that we work, and help educate. Education and educating the population is honestly the root to allowing that society to bring themselves up. Because without that, they are just pushed along and you don't realize there's any difference. You think that's just the way life is. For instance, I didn't realize I was special for being Cherokee until I went to Washington, D.C. Because where I'm from, everybody's Indian. And if you're not, you want to be. And when I get to D.C., someone says, hey, congratulations, you're one of 2 Native Americans elected to Congress. What? I didn't realize there was a difference until I got out of my bubble. And it's the same thing with us working with other countries. We can't think we're going to enforce our way on them. We can show them what this way of government has to offer. And we do that by being patient with them too.
Very quick. I think the United States can and should be doing more. I think some of the statements coming out of an administration give leaders like we've seen in Hungary cover to do an awful lot of things that aren't necessarily helpful to promoting democracy in those areas. I think that there's, without question, more that some of us can do. And I think you've also seen a response from individual members of Congress and senators that have tried to speak up and say, this is not okay. But in the interest of time, we're going to keep going. But thanks for asking the question. It's a great one.
So I'm probably going to be asking one of the more controversial questions today. Congressman Mullen, you have written that unfortunately more gun control is not going to stop criminals from committing evil acts. A few days ago was the 10th anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting. I'm pretty sure you're aware of that. I think gun violence is basically a part of the daily life in America, especially in schools, and as you can tell, we're in a high school. So if you're saying that guns aren't the root of the problem, what is the root of the problem? And what actions are you and your fellow congresspeople going to take?
Sure. Just listen, we fear things we don't understand. That's just the fact of the matter. I've always grown up with guns. My kids have always grown up with guns. It is something that literally is our way of life. And just like I fear walking down the streets from here and getting on mass transit, the subway, for me to take a subway, I'm telling you, I wouldn't do it because I fear it. And you have a tendency to fear guns because you don't understand it, and we assume that guns are the root of the problem. They're the ones that are causing the crime. It is not that. I believe in the Second Amendment, and when you read the Second Amendment and you understand the Second Amendment was there to protect us from our government, and understand why that was written. And so if you want to do away with the Second Amendment or you want to do away with the guns, you also need to go back and take a vote of the people and understand that we're going to have to ratify the Constitution because it's our constitutional right. However, if we learn to educate and understand what the gun is for, we think guns around here, as Joe says, is a bunch of thugs running around the street shooting people. Back where I'm from, it's a way of life, and we put food on our table with it. People say, well, why do we have military-grade weapons that are out there? We don't have military-grade weapons that are out there. That's a misconception, too. It's kind of like when the 300 Chrysler first came out. It looked a lot like the Bentley, but it wasn't a Bentley. And an AR-15, it might look like a weapon that the military uses, but all it does is look like it. It doesn't operate anywhere near like it.
I think the people in Florida would disagree with you.
No, it's not a matter of disagreeing. What I'm saying, I'm not trying to debate you. I'm just saying we naturally fear these things. Is there some things, some roots, that places that Congress can maybe come together? Yes, but understand when we start talking about the issues, we need to talk from a perspective of understanding what it is we're talking about and where it is we're wanting to go, not just make a broad assumption. So often we start talking about, and guys, I'm serious about this, we start talking about the AR, and we immediately say, why do we need the same weapons that our military people are carrying? Well, guys, I've carried both. I've carried both of them. I carried both of them, one being in the United States and one being in the Middle East. And they don't feel the same, they don't operate the same, they don't shoot the same. But they're both scary looking. The first gun that my sons had, that they went hunting with, shot the same ballistic bullet, a .223, that an AR does. And it shoots at the same firing capacity too, but it doesn't look the same because it looks more like a hunting rifle. Once again, this conversation needs to be had, and your perspective is true. Joe's perspective is true, but so is mine. And so we need to sit down and just educate the American people and understand what is the best path forward. And then at the end of the day, what might work for Boston and your backyard isn't what's going to work for us, but that's also why we have local governments too. But just because you fear it doesn't mean that it should be applied to my constituents too. That means we get to choose where we live.
But I just wanted to reiterate. So my question is, like, what is the root cause of all this gun violence then, according to you?
I will answer.
Okay.
I'll tell you, I think the root cause is a breakdown in society, mental health issues, and it goes to the fact that gun violence, I don't believe, is caused by a firearm. I agree with Mark Wayne, and I was up to bat one morning about a year and a half ago in Alexandria, Virginia, when somebody came and started shooting at me and my friends, trying to kill us while screaming healthcare as he fired. The only reason he came to try and kill me and my friends was because he disagreed with us politically. Where are we as a country? Where are we as a country when somebody feels that to solve a problem of disagreement over a political issue, that violence is the answer? He came, and a Bernie Sanders supporter screaming healthcare came with a SKS 762 bullet, high-powered rifle, two 40-clip magazines and fired at probably 25 of us that morning. Most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. You know the last thing I thought about screaming? Hey, did you buy that gun legally? Can you show me your proper identification? You know what I was thankful for? There were two people there that were able to fire back until more law enforcement came. That experience took about 10 minutes. Over 110 rounds were shot. And the only reason that I'm sitting here today, and that didn't go down as the worst massacre in our nation's history of elected officials, is because a guy named Steve Scalise happened to be there in his security detail that was outgunned, out-ammoed, was there to fire back until the local police came and saved us all. Yeah, both of them were shot. Now, I'm a member of the NRA. I'm a proud supporter of the Second Amendment. That's my district. Your district is much different, and the area you live in is much different than ours. And I believe, like Mark Wayne does, the only way to stop somebody who's gotten to that level where they've decided to use a firearm to commit violence and try and kill someone else is a good guy to be able to fire back. And there are a lot of areas in this country where it takes your police response time here, if somebody were to come in and commit such a tragic act here at Brookline, is probably less than 2 minutes, 3 minutes. We've got areas of our country where the response time at a school in the midst of a tragedy is 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Much different aspect. That's why we can come up with agreements on gun issues and protecting our Second Amendment. But I still don't think criminals who want to use firearms for ill purposes really care about what laws we pass.
I would just say that there are a lot of root causes for a movie theater, for a synagogue, for a softball, baseball field, but the common denominator of them was or were guns. That was the common denominator. And the reality is we have real solutions, many of which we have agreed on and didn't get a chance to even vote on. And so the American public, even through polling, agree that you can still have a Second Amendment and have background checks. You can still have a Second Amendment and ban bump stocks. You can still have so we have a responsibility, but so do all of you. As you mentioned, many of you are going to be soon of voting age. Many of you may run for office yourself. That's what civics is about. Us as citizens. Us stepping up and standing up. Even the issue of research, the fact that we couldn't even study it before was a problem. We now have social media. We now have things that are different than 20 years ago. So get engaged, get involved. We're so glad to see you. This energizes us to see your participation. So thanks for the question.
So
And Flint doesn't still.
unfortunately, we're just running out of time. The congressmen have to get on to another high school today. Congressman Kennedy, since this is your district, what if fine young people like this who have questions that they want to ask to their congressman, what should they do?
One, I think a number of you already do, and if you don't, some of your parents do. But my district headquarters is just down the street in Newton. It's not all that far away. We've got our website takes questions. We get thousands and thousands of letters every single week, letters and emails every week. We try to respond to people as best we can. I also hold office hours throughout my district and every town, so all 34 cities and towns over the course of my term. So at any point when we have those, anybody can walk on in and talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. So you can reach out to our office to find a time. I also do constituent meetings all the time when I'm back up in our office. So reach out to our office, pull together a group of folks, happy to come by. And of course, I think all of my colleagues up here spend some time visiting high schools, individual classes, auditoriums, everywhere else. So anytime you want to have me back, I'd love to be back. I used to live off of Greeno Street at 60, right down the street. First vote I ever cast for myself was here in this gym. So Always an honor and a thrill to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to all the congressmen.
One last thing, just as everybody's wrapping up. First off, thanks for having us. 2, thanks for coming. 3, sorry to the folks that were waiting in line to ask questions. I apologize that we were probably more long-winded than we had hoped. Keep the conversation going. We've got a flag here that was flown over the U.S. Capitol for the school in your guys' honor. Keep staying engaged. Thanks for the questions, and good luck.